Wonderful. Okay. Noreen, next slide if you can.
I think Janet, I asked for control of the slide deck?
Yeah, that's,
Oh, I thought just for her slides.
just for my portion.
So do you want to take the slide deck now?
Or I mean, I can click through too. That's easier. Let me see if I can do it now.
Did you just do that or did I?
It's a good question.
No one will ever know.
Oh, do you want, I mean, I can move them through until it comes to Janet's slides, whenever works easier.
That would
Maybe
be
that makes
great.
the most sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Well, it's really wonderful to see everyone, even though we can't see everyone all at once right now. We see you in the chat. And just to say for people that just came in, the prompt in the chat was to write what you would like to change about public transportation if you had a magic wand right now. So this is our welcome and introduction. We have a lively group, many people from different organizations and different communities. We have two bills that we want to look at today, two important transportation bills. One is the Freedom to Move bill, and Seth will, from the Conservation Law Foundation, so welcome, Seth. We'll be presenting about that. And then an overview of a permitting bill. Janet from Transit Matters will be presenting about that bill. We'll have time for some questions at that point after the presentations, and we'll share about our action. We'll have some breakout rooms to try it out with just a small group of people, and then we'll be coming back together and kind of have more time for questions, and then our action, and then then we'll move on to closing. So next slide. So as I said, welcome, Seth. We're so happy to have you coming from the Conservation Law Foundation. The name of the bill is not Freedom to Move, but that's what it's about. So Seth, take it away.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. I'm Seth Gadbois from the Conservation Law Foundation. I'm a transportation attorney. And yes, here to talk about the bill that we have dubbed Freedom to Move, which does have a much longer name that is way less catchy, but more technically accurate. And so with that, I believe the next slide is the start of my slides. Yes. So if you see the subtitle below, it says aligning our transportation plans with goals for reducing emissions and vehicle miles traveled. That is a technically accurate name, but again, very lengthy. We have dubbed this bill the Freedom to Move bill in reference to a Union of Concerned Scientists report that was published last year that I'll happily drop in the chat later. It's an excellent reference that really talks about the benefits across all metrics for justice, for climate, for public and private spending on the benefits of pursuing climate plans in a way that provides people more options for getting around. That is the overall goal of what this bill is aiming to accomplish, but it does so with three main things. It first aligns the way that our state spends transportation dollars and aligns those decisions with our timely climate plans that I'll share a little bit more context here in a moment. Many of you are likely familiar with our Global Warming Solutions Act. Right now, there is a disconnect between the way that we spend and the targets that we have to reduce emissions for our climate in our future. This would bridge that gap. This would also give the Massachusetts Department of Transportation the explicit authority to set a target to reduce what's called vehicle miles traveled. That is a metric for one of the primary ways that our climate plans aims to reduce emissions by providing people other ways to get around. Essentially, can we reduce the amount of driving that happens within the state, not by forcing people out of their cars who want to drive or need to drive, but by really providing those without options, the kinds of options that they've been asking for getting around. It looks like different things around the state. Get into more of that a little bit later, but right now we've advocated for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, aka MassDOT, to pursue such a target in the past, and it has been left to them saying they don't think they have the authority. They say go ask the agencies in charge of our climate plans. Those agencies tell us to go to MassDOT, and it's a bit of a finger pointing. Meanwhile, progress for providing people options around the state has no real government champion, has no real funding, and this bill would provide MassDOT that explicit authority and initiate a process by which they would set that target. And then the third thing that it does is it creates a coordinating council to bring together all kinds of agencies that are even slightly involved in the kinds of things that impact how we get around. Whether it is the Massachusetts Department of Transportation or transit authorities or even housing agencies, various things that impact where things are and how we get around. It gets everybody together in one space. Again, the rest of the slides are diving a little bit more into each of these points. This bill, the Senate version, was written by Senator Cream, and it has actually had a hearing already in the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. Some of you may have tuned in. Shout out to Janet, who was there and also testified. That was quite a hearing. Thanks to 350 Mass for your support in and around that time. The House version is by Representative Jack Lewis, and that version actually got delegated to the Transportation Committee and has not been scheduled for a hearing yet. So structurally, we will get multiple bites at the apple to really present this bill and discuss it with legislatures. So, but a little bit more of the climate context, if we could go to the next slide. So the Massachusetts state government has committed to reducing carbon emissions. The big one, the statute, is the Global Warming Solutions Act passed in 2008 that requires baseline reductions in emissions by various years. The big one is at least by 85% by 2050 or net zero, and with various tag-along policies. That is the primary statute that's driving that. But over the course of time, the agencies who are involved in really making these emissions reductions a reality and putting forth the strategies that actually get us there have had to be pushed by advocates in recent years, and that led to the executive branch, not the legislature, but the executive branch, so Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs and our Department of Environmental Protection producing what's called the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. That is where the state looked at each sector, including transportation, and said, how are we actually going to make this happen? And it put forth two main strategies. Let's electrify all personal vehicles and other certain kinds of vehicles. That strategy came with hard targets. It's 200,000 electric vehicles, personal electric vehicles on the road by 2025 and 900,000 by 2030. Those numbers, which also have some similar numbers for public chargers and other supporting infrastructure, that coming from the plan sent a goalpost to not only the legislature, but other agencies. Here's where we're going. And even though we're behind on those goals, it has provided a rallying force to generate political will and funding towards that initiative. The other strategy from that plan for transportation was to reduce VMT, that target that I was talking about earlier. How would we do it? The MBTA will generally fix itself, and that will promote ridership. Very disparate and kind of haphazard strategies, no real goal. There are other states that have percentage targets or mileage-based targets. This disbalance, this unbalance, has mean that while we vehemently pursue one side, another side that would provide people options has been ignored while There are various initiatives that may get at it, but it's not really making headway. Meanwhile, driving continues to increase year over year, emissions continue to increase, and people are overspending on one primary way to get around, while the public is also overspending on a transportation system that still favors one extremely polluted source of getting around. And so this is a little bit of the context into the climate framework. And with the next slide, I'll show a little bit of the spending framework. So the way that our state spends transportation dollars largely involves metropolitan planning organizations and documents called transportation improvement plans. Metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, are like semi-federal and state bodies that are in charge of receiving federal funds and working with local actors to distribute funds and plan and spend projects with federal dollars. Massachusetts has 10 MPOs and 3 slightly different rural transportation planning organizations. Again, they consist of representatives from the area and local governments, regional transit operators. It's a very regional-based body that looks to the future of how they're going to spend transportation dollars in a given set of years. And part of the issue is that all of these regions are doing this separately through their own TIPs, the transportation improvement plans. Those funnel up to MassDOT, which approves and reviews one overall statewide plan. And although these plans look at projects ranging from highway expansions or roadway maintenance and various things in between, while they look at potential emissions impacts, there's no accountability mechanism for what happens if the overall emissions that we are approving by spending exceeds what's allowable from that plan we just discussed. In other words, our money is not going where our mouth is. We say we have these huge plans for climate and we want to plan these initiatives, but if that is not how we are spending our money, especially in the context of the federal government funding situation being a lot more jeopardy, there is a huge disconnect between what we are saying, what we are striving for with our climate plans, and the way that we are spending. And so this bill aligns that, bridges that gap in a way that is supported by recent research. Research is showing that the best way to really effectuate real change in the transportation sector is to vehemently pursue strategies that look like ours, that have robust electrification policies, but also are really striving in a structured manner to provide people other ways to get around. And other states are pursuing this by aligning their spending with the plans. If you can go to the next slide. This model is working elsewhere already. We are not starting this from scratch. Minnesota and Colorado already have on their books policies that tie their climate plans with their transportation spending. In Colorado, there was a highway expansion project that would have shot up emissions and driving, and they were able to redirect some funding towards 5 bus rapid transit corridors. And there was another circumstance in Colorado where they were able to provide a rural community some e-bikes. And we've yet to see a little bit of this hit the road really in Minnesota, but their plans are in place and we're learning a lot from seeing what their process has been. So if we can go to the next slide, I want to be cognizant of time. This is really kind of the heart. There's an advocacy group in Minnesota that really lays it out. If an overall plan looks like it's going to exceed what would be allowable in these plans, then either the projects cannot go forward, which is option on the left, and is like a lot of what the opposition is grappling to. Oh, this is only shutting things down. We are trying to focus on the right option, the option on the right. If what it looks like is going to potentially exceed emissions, then we need to mitigate, is the language. We need to take the plan that has these various projects and provide things that will give people options and reduce the potential impact of various projects. And what this looks like ranges from place to place. Heavy rail is great, but it doesn't mean that heavy rail is what's needed everywhere. Mitigation can look like a suburban bus network, someone put in the chat. More sidewalks. Everybody needs sidewalks. green infrastructure like trees to protect people from the heat effect of walking from one place to another. That's part of what it means to get everybody, even tangentially involved in these issues, into the same place in an intergovernmental council forum to really strategize how are we going to what does mitigation look like in each region? It shouldn't be Boston telling rural Western Mass what their strategies look like and vice versa. Every place has different needs, but the issue of not having enough options to get around is a statewide problem, but mitigation is not necessarily a one-size-all solution. And so that's some of the flexibility here, a little bit more about how it would work in action. And my final slide is next. So this is Colorado and Minnesota really look at the outset at highway expansions. This would look at the entire transportation spending portfolio. That means that we would be looking at kind of all projects in aggregate, but it's not, which has its pros and cons. Some people think that the highway expansion is a little too limited because not many states are necessarily pursuing arguable highway expansions, but are they spending in a way that is still misaligned? And this way, we're looking at the entire transportation portfolio to see really where all can we plug in these various mitigation efforts, like more buses, like more sidewalks, like more trees. And none of the other states have kind of the wrangling effects that we are going for right now. On the electrification side of our plans, we have a similar body. It's called the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Coordinating Council. Those get various agencies together to really strategize and make that plan a reality. This is simply doing the same thing for the side of our climate plans that gives people more options to get around. And so while we know there are some needed amendments, I will breeze by those for now because I believe I'm already over time. Happy to take any questions. This is a big topic, and I can already tell that I have jumbled a little bit. So thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you so much, Seth. This is a really important information, and I know I'm processing it. We already have questions in the chat. I didn't know whether, Seth, you wanted to answer some of them in the chat. I want to move on to our next presentation because of time, and then we'll come together and ask some questions as a group. Next slide, please. So we are, as I said before, we're sharing two important transportation bills. The action tonight is about calling your legislators. I am giving you a little preview. Because we don't expect you to be experts on both of these bills by the end of the evening. We have resources for you, but we wanted to share both of them, and you can choose which one you might want to call about tonight. But you'll have all the resources to keep advocating for them and sharing about them. So welcome, Janet. You're going to be talking about an act to streamline permitting for rail electrification, and we know that permitting is a big issue. So I look forward to this presentation.
Great, thank you.
Again, can I just say, keep writing your questions in the chat, and we can kind of look those over as well when we gather on the other side of this. Thank you. Thank you, Janet.
Great. Thanks for having me, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Janey Cheung. I'm the program assistant at TransitMatters, and I lead a regional rail campaign, which I'll get into a little bit later. But today I want to talk about electrifying the commuter rail and how we can unlock better transportation and quality of life with regional rail. So today we have a great asset, of course, the commuter rail. It helps people get to where they need to go, whether it's job opportunities, education, healthcare, or other essential resources. And it's a great opportunity for people to get around and commute without either driving or using another more polluting transit mode. But of course, the commuter rail doesn't come without its challenges. So today we see slow trains on our network with our aging infrastructure and diesel trains, which also result in a lot of delays that you guys may have seen before. And also, the network is plagued by high fares. So whether you're in the core and paying a subway fare of $2.40, or all the way up to $12 to $13 if you want to go out to Worcester or North Shore or the South Coast. So really incentivize ridership if you have a complicated fare structure that people may not be able to afford. And lastly, a lot of the stations may not be located where people live or where people want to go, and regional rail is about connecting people better to either their destinations or other modes of transit. So that doesn't have to be like that. I want you to think about what a better commuter rail system could look like. So we can see, greater service, maybe every 30 minutes, all day, every day. So this means you don't have to wait as long for your train, and you can get where you want to go more frequently. This also means cleaner, reliable, and more quiet trains with electrification infrastructure. And then also just faster trips to Boston, but also all different types of destinations with a more connected network. So what does this all mean? This is regional rail, and a little bit about regional rail. So there are 5 critical components to regional rail. The first is system-wide electrification and buying new electric trains that don't pollute our air. The second is greater accessibility with high-level platforms that allow people to board faster and more comfortably, but also allows trains to operate more efficiently. The third is strategic infrastructure investments that improve service and capacity, things like double tracking or turn tracks that just allow you to run more trains. And then fourth is more frequent service all day in both directions. So every 15 minutes in the core and every 30 minutes outside of that. And lastly, just more equitable fares that are cheaper and allow for transfers between modes to really encourage everyone to have access to this resource. Today, I'm going to talk specifically about electrification. So why does electrification matter? Electrification is really crucial for improving the META. First, modern electric trains or electric multiple units, also known as EMUs, are much faster and much more reliable than our current fleet. Second, electrification infrastructure, specifically overhead catenary wiring, is a proven technology. It is the best and most cost-effective way to cut carbon emissions and boost speeds. We've seen this across the country and even in international examples. And finally, electrification can really play a key role in helping the Commonwealth reach its 2050 net zero emission goals by eliminating pollution at the source, but also incentivizing mode shift and greater ridership on the commuter rail with the improved speeds and reliability. So these improvements will reduce pollution and improve air quality in 2 major ways. So the first, like I said before, is just removing diesel pollution from existing locomotives, even with these greater levels of service. And the second is a better rail service that incentivizes mode shifts, like I mentioned before, that will really pull cars off their road, reduce congestion, reduce pollution, and improve our air quality overall. So what exactly is in the way of electrification? The first thing that comes to mind and is mostly the case is money. Of course, regional rail requires investment, whether it's investing in new platforms that are accessible or the electrification infrastructure itself. Money, it definitely is one of the bigger barriers. But there's also one that we don't talk about as much, and that really hinders rail transformation and makes it less certain and more expensive. And that's permitting. So today, for electrification projects, whether that's putting poles and wiring along lines of track or creating power sources to fuel these electric trains, the META has to go through an environmental permitting process. So even in their right of way or on their land where there is this infrastructure already, the T essentially has to go to ensure that their project is in compliance with all these state and federal environmental laws to ensure that the project's impact on the environment is not negative essentially. So what originally was intended to protect our environment is now being used to stop a lot of this same infrastructure that we need to fight climate change across the country. Environmental review has been weaponized to hinder improvements to public transportation. So this means increased costs and prolonged timelines. And in many cases, this delays projects, and in some cases, this will stop projects altogether. So what we want to do and what we want to advocate for is this bill that we have in the state today called an Act to Streamline Permitting for Rail Electrification. So this was filed by Transportation Chair Senator Creighton and Representative Reed. And what this bill does is it reduces barriers for rail electrification infrastructure by exempting projects to build or improve zero or near zero emission infrastructure from producing environmental impact reports. So what does that mean? Essentially, rail electrification projects, like I mentioned before, the wiring, the poles, the power sources, anything to do with rail electrification, would be exempted from producing one of the reports in the entire environmental review process of one of the pieces of legislation. So the Massachusetts Environmental Protection Act is one of those key environmental review processes or bills or law, and the environmental impact report is one of those things that comes out of that process. So this would essentially exempt projects from that specific report. And of course, there are concerns about what this means for environmental protections. But at the end of the day, this bill is to reduce this barrier that has now been used to stop a lot of the infrastructure that we want to see to address climate change. And some of the questions and concerns that may come up are also, what does bypassing environmental review do to the environment? So streamlining this process does not mean that there's no environmental review. The TE still has to submit an environmental notification form in the MEPA process that comes earlier, and there are also just a lot of other state legislations or state laws that protect protected areas, things like wetlands, waters, or historical districts. So this is helping to streamline the process and removing one step out of the entire environmental review process. And finally, this has been successfully done before. So this bill was inspired by the California version, where the state was able to pass a bill to streamline the environmental impact process for projects. And we should join California in this fight to electrify our transportation networks and ensure that people have sustainable transit options to go where they need to go. So with that, I want to say, permitting reform is not necessarily a new concept, but if we want to start that conversation for transportation, we need to talk to our legislators, let them know what we want to see in our neighborhoods and what we want to see for our transportation. I'm not sure if you guys are all familiar with the Fairmount electrification process, but that is the first step and a major step, but there's still a lot of work to be done to allow for more reliable modes of specifically EMUs and not just battery electric multiple units. And that starts with electrification infrastructure, which is why we want to do permitting reform. So yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you. So Noreen, I wonder whether we could, even though we won't all fit on one screen, whether we could take down the slide show for now. We're going to have some time for questions. I'm going to say everyone will get the slides as well as I will put in the chat a document to some of the resources that we have and the sample script that we will use. But this is a time for questions. There's some I know in the chat, but if you raise your hand, we'll spend about 10 minutes on this, and then we might need to pause and think about, okay, I really am moved by this bill and I want to call my legislator today, and we'll go into breakout rooms and talk with our colleagues. So first questions. I am going to look for the wave of the hand or the little yellow hands.
There were some questions. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Mary Bain, you had some questions both in the chat and you may have, so why don't you go ahead and ask a couple of questions now.
It's just a simple question of fact. I probably should know, but I do not know, and it matters, whether by vehicle miles we mean train miles, bus miles, ferry miles, bike miles. What is a vehicle?
Great
Thank you. I
question.
was actually, I was trying to get you an answer in the chat that was succinct but accurate. Generally, we're thinking about personal private automobiles and commercial vehicles. The way that the state tracks those miles or estimate miles is generally the light duty sector. So think your regular personal automobile or the medium and heavy duty class of vehicle. Those are the two main categories. The medium and heavy duty touches on a lot of the commercial space, delivery trucks, vehicles of that sort.
Is that what the regulations mean by vehicle?
So there's not exactly there's not necessarily a uniform way of designating those vehicles, but the way that we're talking about it in Massachusetts, those are the classes that we're talking about. It's
Well,
not,
okay, but if you're
it's
gonna
not
make a
include.
law, it needs to be clear that, electric trains miles don't count in the same way. And so that's why I'm asking, just for the,
Absolutely. Part of it is that some of this statute is directing MassDOT to essentially initiate a process. So once they would initiate the process, it would take a different place in our overall plans to really set those parameters, those definitions. But I agree that in this process, there needs to be an explicit understanding of what kind of vehicles we are and aren't talking about here.
okay. But there isn't yet. Okay, thank you.
Tom, and then I'll go to the chat.
Thanks, Connie. Just a question for Janet. So, so often in so many, whether it's housing or transport, climate gets posed against environmental review a lot, and environmental justice. So, how without that one layer of environmental review, how do we ensure environmental justice in this in terms of siting of the electrical infrastructure that would be needed to support electrifying the trains?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the bill's not perfect, and it definitely is up for, amendments and tailoring. And I think one of the key points is we want to highlight is that we do want to streamline this process specifically for projects in the MBTA's right of way. So that's where they already own the land, where there is infrastructure most of the time, and where projects have already gone through that permitting process. In a lot of cases, for the diesel infrastructure you see today, they do projects without going through the same environmental review. And of course, we don't want to encourage that, but there are areas where we don't want to make redundant processes. And I think that's the biggest point is we don't want to repeat things that we've already done. So that is a good point, though, that we need to highlight that it is specifically in the MBT's right of way. And also, like I said before, I think there are other pieces of legislation that this doesn't streamline other protections for things like wetlands that this bill does not streamline that protect specific communities that may be more vulnerable.
We're not talking about wetlands, we're talking about people.
Or areas, I guess.
I'm going to read a question from the chat, and then Terry, you'll be next. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the first name right, but Park. In the Freedom to Move bill, if a project is expected to cause increased transportation emissions, is it permitted for the proponent to just offset by providing financing for more sidewalks or shade trees? So Seth, seems like a question for you.
It is a question for me. The way that it would break down I wouldn't call it just offsetting by providing more financing. I think that the overall process between would require a little rejiggering about how metropolitan planning organizations actually model some of this stuff, particularly impacts to providing alternative transit and things that actually reduce emissions. So some of it would just break down in the process of implementation. There was a lot of discussion at the outset with the drafting side on whether this should look at just individual projects or the plan as a whole to provide some flexibility about where mitigation is best suited. It would likely target projects that have an outsized impact on increasing emissions, but I wouldn't call it just providing sidewalks or shade trees. It would really be on the context of the particular project and that region's input, right? Again, coming back to it's not on one area to determine what it would look like for another area. In what we've already seen in Colorado, they were determining that it made more sense to offset by providing bus rapid transit corridors to generate more ridership. It also looked like providing a different area of the region some e-bikes to be able to get more ways to get around. And so I think that there are certain projects that maybe might not be able to generate enough emissions reduction the way it's currently planned. So maybe they need to get back to the drawing board and make their initial plan, especially if it's a larger infrastructure, maybe a little bit more conservative to it to reduce their emissions on the design side, literally how they are making the project as opposed to how they would mitigate it. So hopefully that answers your question. Again, I was trying to do it in the chat a little bit without writing a small novel in the Zoom chat. So thank you, Connie, for raising that verbally.
Great. And Terry, I'm going to call on you next, but we are in the crunch time. So just a question and perhaps a short response so that we have time to be in the breakout rooms and then to do our actions. So Terry, go ahead.
So quick one first. Is there a presentation on Seth's, like the Seth's presentations, or can we at least look at those? And then the second one is, I know you mentioned about the 50% goal for 2030. Are we on track to hit it? And if not, how badly behind are we?
I'm fine with my slides being shared. I think that we are already looking behind for our 2025 sublimit, which is here. And I think that unless something dramatically changes, we can assume the same thing for 2030. Different approaches to what accountability looks like in this circumstance. One of the levers is pursuing through the legislature to try to make sure we have a robust strategy for the future, and really you said keep it short. I'm going to keep it short. There's the answer.
Great. Thank you.
And Terry, we know each other. Feel free. Let's talk more offline too.
Great. So Noreen, if you can put up the slides back up, what we're going to do is I think, how much time did we say, Sarah, that we do breakout rooms for?
We said about 8 minutes.
We might chop that down to 6 minutes, given the time. And we want to share with you the resources which are in the chat. I just shared the PowerPoint with you, but the transportation resources and sample, I'm going to reshare. So we want you to be able to go to breakout rooms momentarily with about 3 people, talk about which bill you're interested in. You can look at the resources that we have and think about what you want to say on your call. We have call samples, but personalize it, make it your own. So all the information should be there. Let us know if you have trouble with that.
Connie, what slide do you want me to put up?
I think actually just the actions slide would
Where
be
is
great,
that?
or I could just, maybe what I should do is just read it to folks for this moment, go into breakout rooms, if that's good. So Sarah, could you do your magic with the breakout rooms?
Off they go.
And we'll be calling our legislatures to urge them to support one of these bills, and this is your time to practice.